So my wife and I were talking about pregnancy yesterday, and it made me go down a bit of a rabbit hole. My wife has given birth 4 times. Her first birth was a C-section, and the rest were a vaginal birth, which are called VBACs, vaginal birth after cesarean. And for the ones that don't know the terminology, a cesarean is a C-section. So during the time she was pregnant, within 3 cities around us, we found one provider that would be willing to do a VBAC. And she did beautifully with our second child. But then that practice closed, and we had to go to another one, and they were very highly against it. But she was able to finally talk them into letting her have one. And she delivered the other 2 beautifully. But I got to do my research because there's a lot of videos of labor and delivery nurses, OBs, and everybody talking about how they're highly against VBACs.
Not this lady. If there's one kind of patient that I love taking care of, it's what we call a TOLAC, or a trial of labor after cesarean, and hopefully we are going to have a VBAC. I want to play some more of his video and give some context and my thoughts.
Now, the main reason that they're really against it is the risk of uterine rupture. So say the word with me, research. The risk of uterine rupture with a VBAC is less than 1%, usually 0.5. And I looked up the mortality rate for VBACs in the United States per year, and there is nothing. There is no data whatsoever. I looked up the mortality rate for C-sections, and it's 27 out of 100,000.
If there is a death from a uterine rupture, that would count in the mortality rate of a C-section, because that is what would end up happening, right? So if you have a uterine rupture, it's an automatic C-section.
Doctors around here, and they allow you to have 3 C-section births before they highly push birth control. Because obviously cutting in the same spot over and over and over again increases your risk of complications. So I told my wife, this kind of sounds like population control, because these doctors pound it into these nurses' heads that this is a scary, bad thing.
So it's less like a conspiracy theory of population control and more like a vicious cycle, right? Like you have one C-section, and then to prevent a uterine rupture, we have another C-section. Well, now you're kind of like stuck in the C-section loop, and then it becomes really too risky to try a VBAC after 2 C-sections. So then we just keep doing the C-section, but now it's really too risky to keep having C-sections, so maybe we should not have many more babies. It's kind of like a vicious cycle rather than like, oh, we need to control the population, you know? Onward.
We've seen multiple videos of different labor and delivery nurses last night talking about how bad this is, how scary this is, and people need to stop spreading misinformation. Because that's wrong, and that was made abundantly clear in my comment section yesterday. So after a lot of research, it came down to money and their time. Normal vaginal labor.
Now, I'm not going to say that there isn't some doctors out there who do it purely out of convenience or money. I'm not saying that that doesn't exist at all. But here's what I want to tell you is the real conspiracy. It's not really a conspiracy. It's a well-known fact. I believe that the fear of VBAC comes from the fact that labor and delivery is the most litigious area of medicine in the whole anything. In most states, you have up to 18 years to sue if you believe something went wrong in your birth. Now, I'm not saying that this is good, bad, or indifferent, but the real conspiracy has to do with the fact that so much decision-making in OB comes down to how likely am I to get sued for making this decision. And when 1 in 100 or a little less than 1 in 100 TOLACs or VBACs end in a uterine rupture, so many OBs do not want to be responsible for that, for saying like, yeah, I think you should go ahead and try for a VBAC, knowing that eventually somebody that they say that to is going to have a bad outcome. So it feels safer to say, hey, let's just schedule a C-section. Now, the reason that you'll see a lot of doctors and nurses talking about how scary a VBAC is because of trauma. Now, when they're talking about this, it's not some like amorphous, like general thing that they're talking about. Like when something bad happens, we see faces, and that can cause a lot of bias against something that can be safe for most people. So I want to talk to you about things that can make TOLACs and VBACs safer, and what I call good vibes and not so great vibes for having a vaginal birth after cesarean. So the first thing that's going to affect whether this is an option for you is your choice of provider and where you deliver. There are many hospitals that do not have 24/7 anesthesia coverage, which is going to affect whether or not a hospital allows a VBAC or not, because they want to have someone there all the time just in case something goes wrong, because they want to be able to help you. So if you have a hospital that says we don't allow VBACs, usually that's why. meaning that they probably have an anesthesia provider that's on call at home. And if they're on call at home and something happens, that's way too much time. Like, that's going to be bad. So they typically don't allow those there. The next thing that's going to affect whether or not a VBAC or a TOLAC is right for you is the reason for your first C-section. If it was a baby problem, you are a great candidate for a VBAC. Meaning, if it was a fetal heart rate indication, your baby's heart rate wasn't acting right and we needed to go for a C-section, or your placenta was in the wrong place, or your baby was turned in a weird way. All of these have great vibes for being able to have a different outcome for your next baby. Now, if it was mama dependent, these are slightly less great vibes, meaning that you got to complete and you push for 4 hours and your baby never descended into your pelvis. The pelvis is going to be the same, right? So you could try for a VBAC and go through the whole process and end up still with a C-section after pushing for 4 hours. It could possibly be the same outcome, which is why a lot of providers will say just schedule another C-section. The next and probably most influential part of whether or not you may be able to try for a VBAC is how many C-sections you have had. 1 C-section, great vibes. More than that, it is going to be very difficult for you to find a provider who is willing to take on that risk. Can people have a vaginal birth after a few C-sections? It absolutely can happen. Would I recommend for my sister to try a vaginal birth after several C-sections? Never. Because that uterine rupture risk becomes way more real. And the reason that uterine rupture is such a terrifying thing to like a labor and delivery nurse or a physician is because we have minutes, like less than 5 minutes to get that baby out to the NICU before severe brain damage and or death. So yes, the risk might be really low, but the outcome or the consequences if something goes wrong is astronomical. So that's why you see a lot of people just saying, just schedule a C-section. But the more C-sections that you have, the riskier both a vaginal birth and a C-section becomes. That is why if you are thinking about trying for a VBAC, the best time to do it is with your second baby. Because past that, it is going to be so difficult for you to ever try that. Something else that can make a vaginal birth more likely is if you are able to go into spontaneous labor. This is not to say that you cannot induce somebody who is trying for a VBAC, but our options for being able to induce you are limited because we cannot give you cervical ripening medications. The reason for that is cervical ripening medications are usually pills. Once you give somebody a pill, you can't remove that pill's in there, right? So we would have to use IV contraction medicine, aka Pitocin, if we were going to induce you, and because we can turn that stuff off. But anytime we are increasing the contractile strength of your uterus, that can increase your risk of uterine rupture. It's such a catch-22. So you may have a doctor say, hey, I'll let you try for a VBAC if you come in spontaneous labor by this number of weeks, but past that, we're going to have a C-section. Just know you can make your own informed and empowered decisions, and your provider should be giving you all the risks and benefits of both doing something and not doing something. I love a VBAC, and I think that birth could be safer if we let people start trying more for a VBAC, if that's what they want. Just as long as they know all the risks and benefits of everything. And they are in a safe place to try for that VBAC, aka a hospital with 24/7 anesthesia coverage.